Welcome to the Grief Dreams podcast. Thanks for tuning in. This is where we have conversations with guests about life, loss, grief, and grief dreams, which can be dreams of your loved ones that have passed away. So if you want to know more about the topic, you can definitely check out our website, griefdreams.ca, for more information. And here are 4 ways you can help support the podcast and help us spread awareness on this amazing topic. So number 1, subscribe and rate the podcast on the platform that you listen to it on. Number 2, become a member of the podcast, and that's for as low as $1.50 a month. This helps us run the podcast, and you can find the Patreon link in the show notes. Number 3, you can take the Grief Dreams online course by Dr. Joshua Black at griefdreams.ca. And lastly, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Clubhouse, and Facebook at Grief Dreams. And now on to the show.
The new beginning.
Welcome to the Grief Dreams podcast. My name is Sean Ram alongside Dr. Joshua Black. Happy to be here. Happy to be podcasting. And yeah, thanks for listening. On today's episode, we have with us Callsuma Ali, and she is a British Bangladeshi podcaster. She is the host of Bereavement Room, a British-born podcast about life, death, grief, and identity from the perspective of Black and Brown voices across the diaspora. The podcast was launched in November 2019 following poor experiences Callsuma went through when accessing bereavement support and therapy, the discrimination experienced when speaking about her Muslim experience of bereavement and grief. Bereavement Room dissects a narrative that isn't the norm in mainstream grief spaces or spoken about often. It has since garnered a worldwide listen with over 8,000 downloads. Callsuma, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Sean. Hey, Dr. Joshua Black. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, as we were talking prior, we just love having other podcasters who are in the space of grief. And I think it's just great to shine a light on what everyone's doing. And everyone has a different unique flair to why they're doing what they're doing. And so I'm really curious to get to know your perspective and why and what you saw as you're going through your grief journey, just because it seems like it's a very unique perspective from me. And so could you go through maybe who died and what that relationship was like?
Yeah, sure. So my mum died in 2010, and then my younger brother died in January 2018. And it was after my brother's death that I kind of launched my podcast. The relationship that I had with my mum for the 26 years that I did have her in my life was a little bit complex. My mum wasn't very present in the early part of my life because my younger brother had disabilities and he needed 24-hour care. So when he was born, her focus sort of shifted a little bit, I guess. And the dynamics and things in the family changed at that time. Like my dad had taken early retirement. So my mum was not the person that you would see at the school gate. She was not the person that spent the most time with me because understandably she was with my brother. And so the roles kind of shifted and my dad kind of took on most of bringing me up throughout my life. So the relationship with my mum, there's a lot of love there, but it wasn't so emotional. And when I look back on that, I think it's probably because she just wasn't very present in my childhood because she had other things going on. So, yeah, I mean, as we got older, we managed to form a much closer relationship because the relationship you have with your parents, it does evolve over time. How you know your parents as a child is very different to how you know them as a teenager and a young adult. But I guess by the time we had formed a relationship, it was too late because, she was dying. She had cancer and she died within a 6-week window. So, yeah, I can't sit here and say that like my mum was my best friend and she was like, she was an awesome person. She had a great sense of humor and people gravitated towards her. She was like a host and everything. But I was a lot closer to my dad, and even saying that out loud makes me feel really bad, but I just had a closer relationship to my dad because he was a lot more present in my life in comparison to my mum.
It's good to hear that because I also have had a, let's say, complicated relationship with my parents. And I think that is more common than I think we think. But I think saying it out loud sometimes makes you feel a little bit, like you said, maybe like a bad person. I don't know. What do you think about that? Like, how is it saying it out loud and experiencing that?
I guess it's a little bit uncomfortable. I don't know if it's bad
Mm,
or an uncomfortable feeling, but you hear people talk about their mums, and when people ask you that question, what was your relationship like with your mum? I I find it really hard to go, to describe that relationship as it was this perfect, amazing mother-daughter relationship, because it isn't. And I don't think anyone's relationship with their parents are perfect. I don't think there is a perfect mother-daughter relationship. It's just that I'm very conscious of the fact that my mum wasn't as present in my life as it is for some of my friends, for example, or
mhm.
my cousins or my sisters even. My mum was very present in my sister's life and my older brother's life, but it's just the timing of life and what happened and circumstances that she couldn't give me the same attention. And so I probably don't like that. I wish she had more time for me
Yeah.
when I was a kid, and maybe that's why it's uncomfortable to say out loud.
Yeah, no, I totally feel that. It can be a little bit difficult growing up in a situation like that. And with my mom, it she worked a lot. So there wasn't as much interaction as I would have liked. Is it nice knowing, because you did say that you guys had a chance, had some moments, had an opportunity to kind of build on top of that relationship the older you got? Was that something you really appreciate and look back on now?
Oh yeah, for sure. It was around about my early midish 20s, I think. Yeah, we had some time then together. I've got lots of memories of us being in the garden, like you mentioned earlier, gardening and stuff. My parents were keen gardeners. We had a huge garden in the back garden. They used to grow their own food. So, I have memories of gardening with them and water fights, and I'd go traveling a lot when I was in my early 20s. And so my mum would always give me a little shopping list of things that she wanted. And we'd sit and chat. And yeah, I have a wealth of memories to look back on, but I guess it wasn't your traditional mother-daughter relationship that you hear about in the mainstream or in the media. But yeah, for sure. And I'm really grateful for the time that I did have, but it I have to be honest, it got cut off just as
Yeah.
it was forming into something really special.
Yeah, that's very similar to what I had with my father. Like we had a very strained relationship probably until the last year and a half before he died. And then he started treating me more like a friend and wanted to get to know me a little bit more. And we had like actually moments I look back on that were just fun. They're just fun times. He wasn't trying to tell me how to live my life or live in the world and protect me, I guess. It's hard because when you look at that, you're like, wow, like even a couple more years, it just would have built so many more memories and a stronger bond. So yeah, I can feel that from you. It's sad that you didn't get that much more time to have those moments with her. And I'm curious about your brother. Like, what was your relationship with him like? You mentioned he had disabilities, but what was that like?
Yeah, so my brother was born with autism. He was non-verbal. He didn't have any mental capacity. He had like Downs. I was very close to him. We all were. He was the baby of the family. Although he was my brother, I sometimes like to describe him as my child, because anyone that's listening that grew up with a sibling that was disabled or had no mental capacity or disabilities or autism, whatever it may be, will know that it is like having your own child also, because you're taking on a lot of caring responsibilities. And so I was a young carer for a very long time. We all were. And we took part in look aftering him because he needed a lot of care, and it was something that my parents were really new to. It was shocking. My mum, when she gave birth to him, that's when she found out that he had his disabilities. It's not something they told her while she was pregnant, because back in those days I don't think they had the technology to kind of detect that. So growing up with him was It was interesting, just kind of how people treat you when they see you on the streets. Like they just kind of stare at you because they can visibly see that he is different. You can tell from his face that he has disabilities. He doesn't speak. He needs a lot of care. He didn't go to a normal school like I did or any of my other siblings. He went to a special school for kids with disabilities. And yeah, growing up with him was always fun, to be honest. I don't really remember it being hard or anything like that. It's only now when I reflect back on it since podcasting and talking about grief that I realize how difficult it must have been for my parents. And there are certain points in my life as I grew older as a teenager, making difficult decisions around his care and what that looks like and kind of what is best for his needs. There are various points where I remember it was quite hard because my parents were aging and my brother's getting older, and as he ages he needs more care, because he's not a baby anymore. It's different when you've got a child with a disability. As a baby, you're just pushing them around in the pram or whatever and carrying them, but as someone gets older and stronger, care starts to look different. So yeah, with my brother, like he's just my younger brother, really. We loved and adored him. He was spoiled, and I feel like he lived a better life than I did socially, for sure. He did so much. Like he went on holidays and traveled a lot and lots of day outs and had lots of friends and definitely got a lot more gifts than I did growing up. He was cute. He was just such a cute, adorable child. And I have millions of photos of him, thankfully, and dotted around everywhere in my apartment. And he was just the baby of the family, just our special baby that we look after and loved and were always really concerned about because he was vulnerable. He was like a vulnerable member of society because he couldn't speak. He couldn't do anything for himself. That was heartbreaking for my mum, and I think it definitely had an impact on her mental health, I think, for a very long time, which went undiagnosed. But yeah, my brother was like, I don't really know how else to describe him other than he was the baby of the family that everyone loved, and he was very spoiled. And yeah, I've got loads of great memories with him, like Christmas parties, birthdays, running around. Yeah, it's kind of, I guess you have to have a brother or know someone with disabilities. I don't know if you do, but it's hard to explain that relationship to people. And I often avoid it, if I'm honest. But it's easier because I feel like I'm always over explaining.
Yeah, my cousin has some disabilities, and I know how tough it can be, mostly because of the stigma and I guess the added pressure that society puts on a lot of caregivers. Because, and again, like my aunt and uncle and like my cousin, my aunt and uncle and their whole family, like there's a lot of caregiving involved, and they can definitely probably like going different places probably have had happen what happened to you guys, where people are looking and they don't really know what's going on, and they kind of spend a little time just focused on that. But I think if society was built a little bit differently and we were all a little bit more knowledgeable, I think it would be a little bit less stressful.
Oh yeah, I don't think that people are very informed of these things, and there is a lot of stigma attached, as you said. It's really hard, I think, having a child with disabilities and a sibling that needs a lot of care. It is really hard. I can't even explain what that is like. I sometimes can't put it into words. But he was very loved, and I'm sad that he died because he died at age 30. And, there's conversations that need to be had about care homes and caring and stuff like that, and just the wider society and how we treat our vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Did he live with the family for the whole 30 years, or was he put into or placed into a care home or a group home?
He lived with us up until he was in his early 20s, I think 2021. And then the latter half, he was for 10 years in a care home.
Right after your mom died, that he was placed in the home?
No, my mum was still alive.
Oh, she's still alive.
Yeah, she was still alive. So it was before 2010, because my mum died in 2010. It was maybe about 3 years before she died. And it was a difficult decision, and it's one that my sister really wanted for my parents because it was getting too much. He was getting older and stronger, and his caring needs were changing. It was getting too much for my parents' mental health. They needed some respite. And there were just conversations had about, does he stay with the family? Another, one of us? Do we just become a carer full time? Sacrificing our careers, giving up our jobs to just take, because he did need 24/7 care. It's not like you could put him in a self-catered home where he can look after himself. He couldn't do anything for himself. And so, my mum was very much alive at that point. I think it was 3 years before she died, before we made that decision for him to go into a care home. And that was, I remember that day when he left very clearly. It was the hardest decision, I think, for my parents to make. And it was a really emotional decision as well, to decide that, a care home would probably be better for his needs going forwards.
Yeah, it's so tough. And you just, you just don't want the individual to feel like it's against them in some way. You want them to sort of still feel loved in the process. And it's difficult. It really, sort of plays on your emotions. And so did you get a chance, as you sort of move through, I'm guessing you had a lot of opportunities to still visit and hang out with each other as you move forward. And so I'm curious, just at my own understanding, because like when I look at research with individuals with disabilities and grief, it's very disenfranchised and not a lot out there. So I was wondering if you just shed some light before we talk about your grief and what you went through, about your brothers and how that was to explain it to him, and then also his reactions.
My brother didn't have any mental capacity, so we could tell him that, but he wouldn't have a response. He'd just move on to something else, like his music, or go into, we could tell him, but he didn't have a reaction. He didn't understand anything because he didn't have any mental capacity. And so, you can explain anything to him and he wouldn't understand anything. So he didn't have a reaction, but it wouldn't matter what you did tell him. He wouldn't have a reaction about anything because his attention would be whatever he's doing. So he'd put the music on, or he'd want to get away from you, or he just want to be left alone. He didn't understand death or the permanence of death. He didn't understand right or wrong, or he didn't. Yeah, he had no understanding of anything like how we do about life. He didn't have any understanding of that. He was like a baby. He had the mental capacity of a baby, is probably best to describe it. So trying to explain to him that my mum had died, whether he digested that or understood that, he may have understood it through presence and seeing, because he would have eventually realised that she'd stopped visiting him. And he wouldn't be able to verbalise, oh, where's mum? I haven't seen her. He maybe would verbalise it in tears or challenging behaviour or something like that. But my brother was someone that had poor mental health anyway and would have quite a few tears. So you wouldn't necessarily know if it was related to my mum or if because he couldn't have his radio or his stereo system for the evening. So it's really quite difficult to explain because he didn't have any mental capacity. You could tell him anything and you don't really know if he understands you.
Yeah, it's a challenge in offering grief support. You just don't know what they're feeling, what they're actually thinking about, and so like how much of it is causing the behavior and whatnot, and how to support them moving forward. Very, very interesting. No, I was curious about that. And so looking at I know you were saying after your mom died, you didn't get support, but it was after your brother died you got support. Is that true?
Yeah, sorry, can I just go back to what you said about support for children with disabilities? Actually, creative play is what works for children with multiple disabilities or just children in general. And he did have a lot of creative play. It was part of his schedule, everyday schedule, because it helps them in terms of therapy. So you know how we have one-on-one talking with a counsellor for kids and kids with disabilities, it is continuous creative play, whatever that may look like, whether it's painting or respite or holidays or, playing games. So grief, that's what grief support should technically look like for anyone with disabilities or lack of mental capacity, or a child that doesn't understand the permanence of death. I just wanted to make that a point. I think that's really important because that does exist. It's just seeking it out and finding it. And it might not be common, but it is out there.
That's interesting and great to know as well. Kind of like, I guess, would be similar to children in a way, just trying to allow them more ways to express themselves, I guess, rather than in the norm talk and answer.
Yeah, because not everyone can talk.
Yeah, exactly. People can express themselves in beautiful ways, and art and music and all these different ways that we can communicate. Yeah, that's a great thing to know.
Yeah, and music for him was his life, and music was his way of expression. And that's the thing. We all have different learning styles and different needs, and so it's really important to adapt to that.
Yeah, I've heard of different types of therapy with people who have forms of Alzheimer's, who then they play music from the era that they grew up in, and they respond a little bit differently.
Absolutely. Yeah. Dementia and Alzheimer's is very common. I used to play music for my dad from his era because my dad got dementia later in his life. Yeah. So, sorry, I kind of skipped through the question you asked earlier. You wanted to know about therapy.
So yeah, after your brother died, that's when you sort of had the need to go see therapy, but you also sort of found the discrimination that you experienced. And I just want to know more about that, because like it's not something that I've come into contact myself with, and it'd be nice to know more about what you've dealt with.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't new to therapy after my dad's death. My brother's death. Gosh, I can't keep count because so many people have died. I had 2 sessions of therapy after my mum died on the NHS, and it didn't go well, which is something I talked about on my podcast, and I just sacked it off. I was like, forget it, I'm not going to do this, because they just allocate you a therapist, and I got an Italian therapist and I was lost in translation with her. So I was like, I can't do this. So I spent most of my life just traveling, and that's how I healed. With my mum's loss, that's kind of how I processed it. But with my brother, the discrimination, with my brother's death, it was really, really hard for me. I think I was someone that was, in comparison to my mum's death, I think I dealt with that in such a way that I found something that worked for me. But with my brother, I couldn't, there was just, there was nothing. I really struggled. And I was like, right, I need to speak to a professional about what's happened, because I never really spoke to a professional about my mum's death because it didn't quite work out at the time. And I thought maybe now's the time to get proper therapy. And when I did get therapy, it was through an employee assistance program. So it was via work. It's one of these contracts that your employers get where you get 6 or 12 sessions to speak to a therapist. They just allocate you by postcode. That's how they do it, by distance of where you live. And so I got allocated this therapist. And during that time, I was also going through a transition because I'd worked in tech, like MarTech and technology, for 10 years. And after my brother's death, I just felt very differently about society and just things that were going on and injustices. And it brought up so much stuff also in relation to my mum's death that I think it's hard looking back, because my mum died 10 years ago, and so I have a bit of memory loss, but it just brought up so much stuff and I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel well in myself. And so I saw this therapist, but she couldn't address the bereavement. It's like we could talk about everything else, but she couldn't address bereavement and she couldn't address racism. And I really, I don't think it was her field of expertise. She would almost avoid it or say nothing. She wouldn't try to encourage me to talk about it. And I would say that I'm an open book. I don't find it hard to not talk. I'm happy to answer questions. But she could not address the issues. And when I talked about racism, she would gaslight it as me getting too involved in the cause and the cause hindering me, and that it was like all in my head. And anyway, I got to the end of the 12 sessions with her. And bearing in mind, she's not young. She is a much older woman, right? And so she's got
Definitely
years of
not what you would
experience.
want out of a therapist.
No. And I mean, she did address some family systemic issues, like one or two things, but bereavement, I don't think that was her field of expertise, perhaps. And racism was just, she didn't want to address that. As far as she was concerned, she didn't really see it as an issue, that I was being too bogged down by identity and, how this affects me in my daily life. Anyway, I got to the end of the 12 sessions because I was desperate. I needed to speak to someone. And therapy isn't cheap. Me getting it through work was a bit of a blessing, but also a curse because she was no good at her job. So I then, because I was going through a transition, I reached out to a major bereavement charity in the UK, right? And they deal with everyone in the UK. It's volunteer led and they get a lot of funding. I then at that point had enrolled on my foundation counselling skills course at a really good school, and I was volunteering on a helpline. I just wanted to do something different. I wanted a break from the corporate world. And yeah, I went to this bereavement charity and we were talking about death from the perspective of different cultures. When it was my turn to speak, because when you go to these sessions, you do need to share a bit about yourself and why you're there. So when it was my turn to speak, I spoke about my brother and my Muslim experience. And yeah, it didn't go down too well in the room. It was like I was the alien in the room, because what I had to say about Muslim funerals and how they work, Muslim funerals are very quick. They're usually between 24 and 48 hours. There's not really a chapel of rest. I'm not going back and forth to the chapel of rest where I'm from. And they're very, very quick. There's the ritual that you have to take part in as well, like the washing of the body and the clothing and stuff like that. When I had to explain these things to the people in the room, they didn't get it because I don't think they'd heard that experience before. It also came with a bit of gender judgment that, oh, that's just how it is. That's what Muslims are like. They're very oppressive towards women, which isn't true at all. They'd never heard my experience before. And yeah, it came across really judgmental. And some of the comments that came across from the other volunteers, bearing in mind everyone else in the room is Caucasian, because that's just how it works in UK charities. It is very white. I'm sorry to say it. Well, I'm not sorry. That's just the truth. It was hard for me in that moment because I was going through like a therapeutic point in my life where I was processing and dealing with the death of my brother. And what I needed in the room was someone to witness my experience and to see me, and I wasn't seen. Everyone just was staring at me in silence, in utter shock, as I told them that I wasn't, I kind of had to fight to be present at my brother's burial, and that it was very, very quick and I didn't have a lot of time. And they, there's a way to ask questions, be curious, not judgmental. And yeah, I felt like the other, when someone others you. Yeah. I just thought to myself, oh my God, I'm being othered. Why are they othering me? This is a bereavement charity. Surely they've heard this experience. They've heard lots of different experiences from Muslim families, Jewish families, Hindu families, whatever, right? They must have heard these experiences before, but they hadn't. And I was just like, well, this ain't right. Anyway, I carried on with my training with them, and I decided to create like a deaf cafe for, I think what you call it is the BIPOC community. We call it the BAME community. But at that time, I created this deaf cafe BAME, and they were against it. They thought I was excluding. They were like, you can't exclude people. I was like, the reason I'm creating it is because there isn't anything for people like me or anyone else from a minoritized community. You're excluding me. I'm not excluding you. They just didn't get it. And I just felt really lonely. I can't even tell you. I was grieving and I just felt really depressed. I thought, oh, this is utter nonsense. And yeah, that's kind of what happened really with therapy.
Wow. That's and hearing that, like, that's the purpose of going to one of those groups, is to feel safe, is to feel like you're being heard, and you felt the opposite. And essentially you didn't feel like they had carved out a space for you. That's correct?
Yeah, all I really wanted,
Yeah.
I just wanted them to see me and witness me. They witnessed each other's
Yeah.
experiences, but that's because they're all from the same community and they do things the same. But I had something different to say, and I just wanted someone to show me some love in that moment and see me, and I wasn't seen. I was the alien.
Yeah, that's honestly, that's super unfortunate to hear, especially in like a charity and or organization that's supposed to be reflective of the country. It should also be reflective of the people of that country. And also, like, the administrators and stuff, like, they really need to be knowledgeable and accepting and say, yeah, there are people of different colors, there are people of different genders and groups, and we want to make the effort to know all these groups. And that we could talk all day about the types of changes that need to take place in some of these groups. But yeah, that's unfortunate, and it's tough to hear that someone who wanted to feel heard and wanted to share in their grief and to be in a group didn't feel like that.
No, they minoritise me as if I'm not minoritised enough. And
Right.
when I'm coming and talking about death, hello, this is the fact of life,
Yeah,
that you're
yeah.
minoritising me even more. So yeah, it was unfortunate and very depressing, but something good came out of it. So
Change is something that in this field that we've realized is needed, and why our podcast is started, why we love having someone like you on to share the voice of different people who feel disenfranchised. Like, we like to talk about pet loss, we like to talk about different types of disenfranchised grief. Do you remember, Joshua, we had on a person who was trying to find support in a group, but they found that it was more towards parents who had lost children, and that was a sibling. So he didn't feel comfortable even in that group because he had lost his sibling, and the group was, I guess, full of parents who had lost children. And it's
my
just
goodness.
like, it's just tough because it's like, I don't know how that even happens. I really don't.
Yeah, that the thing is, bereavement, right? But I mean, sibling loss is something that's not talked about often, I don't think, in these spaces in the way other bereavements are. And that's really sad that happened. And now I can see why people are now creating specific groups. Like you've got groups for suicide, you've got, meetups for sibling loss, you've got, groups for cancer. But because I think these situations do occur and they're actually quite common. And now people are doing, they're separating out types of losses or, who it is that died. Because yeah, you will, if you're the only one in the room talking about your sibling and everyone else is talking about their child, there's going to be a lot of projection going on and a lot of opinions. And as human beings, we love to project.
Sure.
And that doesn't surprise me hearing that from you, to be honest, that has happened to someone. It's sad. It shouldn't happen. But you're also now seeing that groups are being set up specifically for specific things because of that.
Yeah, just the more we talk about it, the more people can actually start understanding on how important it is. And the same thing with podcasts. Is this why you started your podcast?
Yeah, so as I said, it was a deaf cafe to begin with. So I would host a. Do you know what a deaf cafe is?
Yeah, we definitely do.
Yeah, of course, because they started in the States. So I think they started in the States. That's how I found it to begin with, and that's why I created it. But it was a deaf cafe to begin with, but it was getting logistically a bit hard to manage with a full-time job. And I wanted to reach as many people as possible. And me being a techie kind of person, a Martech type person, I thought, well, I may as well just use my skill set and create a podcast, because that way I can reach everyone in the UK. I can speak to more people, and perhaps it could expand to other parts of the world. And it would be easier for me to manage to do something like that. And yeah, it just evolved from that horrible experience I had with a bereavement charity. It went from a deaf cafe to then Bereavement Room podcast, and I guess the rest is history. It's been a bit of a whirlwind, if I'm honest.
Oh, it's wonderful. And you know what? If the door closes, then you create your own door. And, I think that's wonderful. I think the idea of a death cafe. And side note, we actually have another podcast called Grief Cafe, where we like to talk about issues of grief. But it's a phenomenal idea because, again, these are spaces where we all need to learn. All of us need to learn about other people's because it's so different, and you run into situations where you want to have the space and compassion for people who have faced loss of no matter of any kind. And in modern society, you often have these situations. I mean, just personal example, we had someone that I know had a loss of a child before the child was born. It was an early death. And, it just, someone else had made a comment and just wasn't sure about how that person had expressed it and had negative sentiments towards that person expressing it. And I thought that was a perfect example of disenfranchising grief. Like, someone's loss is someone's loss, and we really shouldn't put these things into boxes. And if that person wants to express grief and their feelings towards this, and if they want to bereave and grieve it, then allow them that space rather than shut the door. And there's all these situations that happen all the time in our normal day in society, whether it's at the workplace or whether it's your neighbors or whether it's people with pets or whatever the situation may be. Or, someone has a grandparent die and the grandparent was 90, and people can say things like, well, they lived a great life. It's like, yeah, but it's like, you don't have to say that, but you should give that person space and say, I'm so sorry about your loss, because the pain is real for them and the pain is there, and allow them, right? There's all these platitudes that we like to and I'm guilty of them, just like everybody else. I've been doing this podcast for 5 years now. I still feel like I mess up sometimes, but I think it's the act of learning and being ready and willing to learn.
Absolutely.
And to move forward. And I'm curious actually, of as a South Asian woman who's Muslim, what are some areas that you feel could be improved when it comes down to, I guess, in Britain, and the support that you've seen people get?
What can be changed, or
yeah, absolutely.
Where do I begin? You talked about the workplace a little bit there. I think the workplace has a lot of responsibility and they need to start being more accountable and more compassionate towards their employees when it comes to grief and loss, because I don't think the workplace is literate in that. I don't think it's in their vocabulary. When someone has died or whatever your loss might be, the workplace doesn't accommodate it. And I think it's worse for people that are from the Black or brown community because of unconscious biases and certain social situations that you have to navigate, and kind of what your role is when you're at work. I actually do think it is worse if you're from a minoritized community trying to have that conversation that, oh, I've been bereaved or I'm going through a traumatic event in my life. And I think there needs to be legislation put in place, whether that's statutory paid leave for everyone, or I don't know, some kind of mental health support, not these EAP programs, because I'm fed up of seeing those. But, just something in place, just people being compassionate, giving you time. You know how kids get timeout cards in school, having timeout cards, flexible working from home if you can. Me, when my brother died, I got 3 days off work, right? And when I asked for flexible working, bearing in mind this is the most traumatic thing that happened, but my brother being diagnosed with leukemia and then just dying within a month, my manager was not very empathetic about it. She wasn't compassionate, and she didn't understand my need to want to work from home, because at the time I was working in a very busy, buzzy Marcom's office. Everyone knows your business. It's open plan. It's a very social environment. You have to kind of socialize. That's part of the role. And I just was not in socializing mood. And what I wanted was to work from home. And she didn't allow it. And I think I've heard that story so many times, both on my podcast and in other spaces, where people are not getting the compassion or the leave or the flexibility they need at work. And the only way to really change that is by putting legislation in place. So that's one thing that I would, for starters, love to see. We've got parental leave of 2 weeks, which is paid for a parent that's been bereaved of a child, but it's not enough. It needs to be for everyone across the board, not just parents. So yeah, legislation. There's a couple of other things as well. I mean, as a South Asian woman, you say South Asian, I'm Bangladeshi, just to be clear, because I hate using that label South Asian. It kind of boxes in everyone together, and we're not the same, and we don't all have the same. We're not all sort of impacted the same by certain social issues. Being a Bangladeshi Muslim woman, I would like to see more spaces that are tailored to us, to give us the support that we need. Because it's not one shoe size fits all. It's going to look different on everyone, essentially. And I just don't think those spaces have been held for me, particularly when I speak about healthcare negligence, for example, because largely my bereavements are about the NHS. And what's caused my grief is negligence and systemic racism. People in the grief space, as you said earlier, it's social media and the workplace are two of the worst places to talk about grief, I think, because ever since I entered social media, as wonderful as it has been and connected me to so many people, I have been trolled, I've been unfollowed, I've had nasty messages because I've spoken out about healthcare negligence. But that's what caused my grief. And people don't want to hold space for that, especially the British taxpayer, because we fund our healthcare and we assume or presume that it's ticking over. When it's not, people don't want to hear that. So when they hear these horror stories, or that our negligence bill is like 4.4 billion, without going down this rabbit hole, people, they don't want to hear that in the online grief space. I find, you know, if I say, oh, I called my dad's phone, I still call my dad's phone, I miss my dad, or, you know, something along those lines. I'm not dismissing that or saying it's fluffy, because that is the truth. But if I share more of that stuff and less of the systemic and injustice stuff, people engage more with, you know, my memories and me calling my dad's phone, and, you know, me being reflective about some kind of memory to do with my dad or the food that he liked. But they don't want to know what caused his death. They don't want to talk about injustices. They don't want to talk about social issues and inequalities. As soon as I start posting that on Instagram, oh my God, the honestly, the trolling that I get, it is just, you know, people don't want to hear that. They're not ready for it. They don't receive it well.
You know what? Yeah. And well, any type of change in that way, away from the status quo, is going to be met with some sort of resistance. So, you know, sometimes you just got to tune it out and just ignore it. But I hear you. I think that having a voice and a seat at the table in terms of being, and I'll correct myself, being a Bangladeshi woman, you should be there. You know, the voice and the knowledge and the awareness. And if you live in that country and there are other people like you who live in that country, you know, you want to have a voice in terms of how the money is allocated in terms of some of these resources. And
Yeah.
you're preaching to the choir when it comes to workplace changes, because Josh is laughing because I've harped on this issue many times. You know, work is not separate from our life. It's a part of it. And a lot of times we see people at work more than we see our loved ones outside of work. So why shouldn't workplaces have more compassionate programs for wellness, for taking care of their employees? And it's your case with your manager who did that. That's a very common thing. And it's so sad that people can't see others as people and see that people need time. And I don't think, especially in your field, it sounds like you could have worked from home.
Oh,
So
easily.
it's like,
Quite easily.
Right. And it's unfortunate that we can't make those connections and understand that, you know, if you treat your employees, if you have more of a program that is designed to give people the time off they need, then that's better for society at large. And you're right, there might need to be legislation put in place for those type of programs.
Yeah, for for sure. And I can see things are shifting and they are changing, and the conversation is changing, but it's the resistance. At the end of the day, the United Kingdom is built on migration. Who rebuilt this country? It was black and brown people. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't really understand why I get treated the way that I do when I enter these spaces. But, it is what it is. And, well, what can I do?
Yeah, and I think what you're doing, what you're supposed to be doing, and that is pushing for change and being part of the younger generation. That's kind of resistance that's always met. I think it takes time, and especially in the industry, in the field that we're looking at, it's sometimes there's a lot of gatekeepers that are older, and it takes someone raising the alarm and putting their hand up and saying like, hey, like, here's an area that we need to expand to. Here are topics that we need to cover, because we're not doing a service to our communities. We're not doing a service to the people who live next to us, our neighborhoods, and what we're supposed to be. Just like your experience going into that for charity service, the bereavement group, like, they should know who the community is and try to organize their program accordingly.
And the thing about that is those charities do good work. I'm not disputing that. It's just sometimes it comes down to recruitment hire and individuals that are in the room. So it can be a bit of an unfair reflection on the entire charity when it's just individuals that aren't clued up or informed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And what makes it hurt that much more is that it happened to you, and that's it really soured the taste.
Oh yeah, for sure. It definitely left a real sour taste in my mouth. But I'm thriving with Bereavement Room, and they can see that. And I had the last laugh.
Exactly, and something good came out of it, and more, and now the awareness, and I again all the success to your podcast, and I hope that you can spread awareness on the issues that are important.
Yeah, for sure. I hope so. I want to reach as many people as possible, like the BR family, I like to call it. I never thought I'd get to 3 seasons, and I'm in 3 seasons now. It's been a roller coaster of a journey, especially because my dad died halfway through season 1. But yeah, I've met some amazing people through podcasting. It's afforded me a lot of opportunities for connections, and also just reflecting on my own experiences over the past 10 years.
No, I'm really happy that you're in that space, and you're finding a way to allow other people to find you too. It's good to say, like, it is hard sometimes to start a group or something within your local community, but a podcast, it's just such a great way for people to find you all over the world, and you don't need to sort of have ads or like to be in an organization. Like, you can start it yourself, and that's what you've done. And I think it's beautiful that people are listening, and you're making an impact in the world and teaching people from your own experience and providing a safer space and teaching people how to provide a safe space to ask those questions. And I think that's great. I'm curious, just because you've had so many people die, have you ever had a dream of any one of them?
Oh my gosh, so many. I've had loads of dreams about my mum and my dad. And interestingly, I had a dream. My dad was alive at that point. It was 4 weeks before he died. I had this dream that we were in our garden, and in our family house in the garden, there is a pavement in the middle that separates the earth that you can walk on, and they used to grow food on either side, so like vegetables and fruit. And in this dream, it was a really sunny day like it is today, and I could see both of my parents amongst all the herbs, like the coriander. It was very, very green, and my mum was saying something to me. She was really happy, and she was trying to say something, and I can't, it was a year ago now, so it's very vivid and it's quite vague, but I always think about that dream because at the time it didn't occur to me that what my mum was saying, which I think I can recollect, is that it's time, or your dad's joining me, or something like that. And I was on the earth side, the muddy side, right? And I was trying to she was trying to reach out to me, but I just couldn't. And when I looked down, all I could see was like the earth and the mud. And when I looked at them, they were like in the sunshine amongst the coriander and all the green herbs. And yeah, it was. See, the thing is, when my mum comes to me in my dreams, it's usually when I'm sad or she's trying to comfort me or I'm distressed. And I can't remember what was happening 4 weeks before my dad died. It was in the new year. And it was a very comforting dream, but I didn't really realize until 4 weeks later that perhaps that dream was her telling me that your dad's going to die. And because my dad did die 4 weeks after that dream. And I feel like it's very symbolic, this dream, very symbolic to me. And it's something that I think about on and off a lot. And I wish I interpreted it at the time, but I don't really know if that would have made any difference. I was just so happy to see my mum in my dreams because that's the only way that I can connect with her, right? And yeah, I have been reading about dream interpretations since that dream. There's a book by Ibn Sirin. He was a dream interpreter from the 8th century, I think. And yeah, I've been reading a lot about grief dreams and I've been listening to your podcast as well because it's something that I think about more so now that my dad has died. But I've always had these really strong dreams. And yeah, it's something that I need to give more thought to, and I've started reading about it. But that dream always comes back to me because it's very symbolic of the fact that it was 4 weeks before my dad died, and my mum was she was telling me like it's time or something along those lines. She was trying to reach out to me, and yeah, that was probably my most memorable grief dream.
I like it too because it was gardening, and you're just talking about how your mom always used to garden, and that's something that you've developed a bond with. And I think you mentioned even prior before the podcast that you garden yourself now, and it's almost a way to almost like have a bond with your mom.
Yeah, my parents loved gardening, and yeah, I think that I've morphed into my parents. I've got plants, spring onions and aubergines and everything growing now, and I understand my parents better now that they're dead. And I know that sounds a bit weird, but I've had a lot of reflection time, a lot of time to reflect since my mum's death, which was 10 years ago, and then my brother and my dad. And yeah, it does make me feel closer to my parents, but I see myself unintentionally morphing into my parents. It's really strange. And it's like everything it's like everything my mum said to me when I was young and naive is coming true, because everything she said to me makes more sense to me now than it did at the time. And that's really frustrating, but then also a gift, I guess. It's life, the circle of life, or however you want to put it. But yeah, I am now a keen gardener. They would be so proud and they wouldn't believe it, honestly. An aubergine. I would never have done that if they were alive. I would have been like, what? No. Why am I going to do that?
Aubergine is eggplant for us North American listeners.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, aubergine eggplant.
Oh, that's all right.
I call it aubergine, but I mean, some British people do call it eggplant. But anyway,
I love the different, when I talk to my cousin in Bristol, all the words she uses. Motorway.
Yeah, motorway.
Yeah, that's a highway here for us. So yeah,
Yeah.
really odd. I'm like you. Yeah, I've gravitated towards gardening in the last 2 or 3 years. And growing up, I saw my grandparents, they immigrated to Canada. And that was the first thing they did when they came to Canada was set up a garden in our backyard. And I've a lot of fond memories of that. And I think that's half the reason I do it now is to connect me to my ancestors. It just feels natural. And I'm pretty good at it, gotta say. But no, it's such a peaceful, I think a peaceful hobby and a peaceful thing to do. And I'm really glad that you had a dream that was reflective of that, and especially with the imagery of being on the in the dirt and kind of seeing them in the light, and what you think might have been your mom saying that your dad was going to come be with her soon, which was interesting.
Yeah, for sure. It was such a strong dream. But I'm just curious to know, because you are the doctor of grief dreams. Do you interpret dreams or?
Well, you got to know a lot about the individual to really, I would say I help people understand their dreams, which is a little different because say like everyone has their own unique symbols. a garden to you means something different than me because I don't garden and nor do I want to learn right now. But for you, it's like you see a lot the differences, and yeah, like I definitely, it takes time to talk about it. But at the end of the day, it's just like, for me, is it comforting for you? Are you having any distress? It doesn't seem like it. And then you're playing with the fact that, she was giving you a heads up, or you're having a dream where it was a heads up about the death of your father in the future. So it's kind of precog too. And that, we've had people on the podcast talk about that. And that just allows people to sit in the mystery of life and to just try to understand that there is more to this life than we know. And as science gets better, maybe we can understand those a little bit more. But in the end, it's just like every religious culture has a different set of beliefs on how they see the dream. So I'm actually really curious, have you talked to anyone in the Muslim community to sort of see if there are different ways they would interpret a dream of the deceased? I know some cultures it can be like a good omen, other ones it's like bad. Sometimes they don't believe it's the visitation, other times they do. And so curious your thoughts, and have you approached anyone in your own community like that?
I haven't approached a person per se. I just got a book about the interpretation of dreams from like Islamic thought because, I'm Muslim. And my understanding, as a Muslim growing up, is that dreams are a gift, particularly if you see your parents. But also, I think Islam also says in the Quran that dreams are also whatever you conjure up in your mind, whatever you were thinking about an hour before you went to bed. So it may not be real, it's just the madness of the mind. But we believe that any dreams before sunrise is quite accurate. But I haven't approached like a scholared person, and I probably should. I just started reading this interpretation dreams book since I had that dream 4 weeks before my dad died. And I would like to connect with more people about grief dreams, whether they're from the Muslim community or not. I'm just interested to know what all the different thought processes are, and just what I just want to know like the symbolism behind it and what people's belief systems are. But no, I haven't approached anyone specific yet.
Hey, well, you should take my online course. I basically talk about grief dreams for 9 hours. But yeah, well, there's just so much to go over, and the best way to, I think, even for people to understand grief dreams is to really just look at examples of dreams, and then also how it connected to waking life and to the individual, and hence kind of what the podcast is about too, which you probably understand as you've listened to the episodes, is you can really see where the individual's connection was to and how their life story really fit into the design of that dream. And then your beliefs afterwards on how you see it is how you see it. But it's just amazing on like how so many aspects of your memories with that person can really infiltrate that dream. That's why there's so much to talk about when it comes to grief in itself, because just if we didn't chat and you just shared that dream, we could have talked about gardening and then, what that meant and everything for like a good hour or two, just because it's a different side of grief that most people don't talk about. And so there's just so many different clues on what you're processing in many ways. And I'm guessing too, if you saw it as a visitation, I'm not sure if you did, I'm guessing that greenery and that flower, like everything growing, could be a sign of something else too, right? Well, you're in the mud.
Yeah, I was on the earth side.
Yeah.
The way that I saw that is me on earth and they're in the Garden of Eden, and it was a visitation from my mother. But it's just at the time it didn't. I was just so happy to see my mum that I didn't try to decipher it too much. It's only when I deciphered it after my dad's death. So
well, there's so many different ways you can view a dream. You could sort of see it as like an art piece, a masterpiece, where you just view it and appreciate the moment. And then there's the other times where you can actually interpret some of the stuff and see how it connects to your waking life. And so there's like a lot of different ways, right? So it's just beautiful that you were able to have that moment and you could just see your mom and healthy and connecting with you, which is something that you longed for. So at the end of the day, I think it's a great experience. I'm happy you had it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm happy I did too.
All right. As we wrap up the podcast, one of the last questions we'd like to ask is if you could have a dream tonight of anyone who died, who would that be and what would that look like?
Oh, probably my dad. Is it only one person that I can choose, or
you can have anyone you want?
Okay. I mean, I would love to just see my my dad and my mum again. My younger brother, I don't have many grief dreams of him, to be honest. I think I've had one. He doesn't appear in my dreams for some odd reason. He doesn't appear in my siblings' dreams either. I think my brother-in-law had one dream about him, that he was skiing. So, so I would love to see my parents again, but my younger brother, I don't know if I'll see him in my dreams. I won't hold out on that, and I don't know why that is, because I just don't believe that I will. But yeah, I would like to see my parents and my brother again together, not separately, like all of us together. I don't know what that would look like. Maybe it's a message. It could be similar to that dream that I had, before my dad died. Just them sending me a message, or us, reuniting, doing something together. I don't know what that would look like. I'm happy as long as they enter my dreams, because that's the only way that I can connect with them. So I don't have this detailed, like, this is what I want to see and this is what I want us to be doing. I'm just grateful that they appear in my dreams, because I know so many people that, they really want to dream of their loved ones and they don't have those dreams. And like I said, with my younger brother, he's only appeared once. So for me to kind of see him again and all of us together would be lovely. I would love to, because it puts me in such a good mood. It helps my mental health, and I just feel more reflective and I feel better. It helps my grief, and what that might look like in the dream, I don't know. I just know that I want to see them.
That's beautiful, and that's exactly what we try to share with people, is that these grief dreams can provide you with these beautiful benefits. And again, it's just an aspect of continuing bonds that's just lovely. Pretty much you're open to like a garden thing. And what's interesting is, I think you said something very, very interesting, which a lot of people have this feeling of, in this situation, you don't want to ask any universal questions. You don't want any in-depth, conversation. It's more about the feeling of being in the presence of each other and what that can provide, which is beautiful. And I think that's a lasting thing that can happen with a lot of these grief dreams. So I really hope you get that.
Oh, thank you very much. Life doesn't, it doesn't end at death. Like, love doesn't end at death. So yeah, I hope I do. Who knows? Maybe I'll have a grief dream tonight.
It'd be interesting too if your brother would still have autism or not, because I know a lot of people who do have different, have had dreams where the disability is gone, and so it's just interesting, and it's be a new memory of how you'd see that person.
Yeah, that's why I'm a little bit jealous of my brother-in-law, because he saw him skiing. He was going really fast and he was skiing. So he's, my brother would never have been able to do that in this world. So if he's skiing in the next world and he's got all his limbs and everything, that's amazing. The little dream that I had of him was very vague and very fleeting, and I can't remember it all too well. But my brother-in-law had this very detailed dream of him, which I'm very jealous of, where he's living his best life. So yeah, I know that I believe in the afterlife, and I hope that his life is very different to what it was on Earth.
Yeah, well, you have it in you, and hopefully you can create that dream and see him doing some amazing stunts. Maybe he'll be skiing and doing a triple axel or some sort of amazing stunt in the dream. And
yeah, hope
you
so.
Be skiing together. Callsuma, this has been an enjoyable podcast, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And just before we wrap up, where can people find your podcast and anything else you want to share?
Yeah, sure. So you can find Bereavement Room on any podcast application, whether that's Spotify or Apple, Stitcher, wherever you like to listen. We're also on social media. The handle is @BereavementRoom on Instagram and Twitter.
All right. Thanks, everybody. That's the show. And we like to end the podcast with love and gratitude from us to you. Thank you for listening to the episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you want to know more about the topic, please check out our platform at griefdreams.ca. On there, you can take our 2 online courses. Number 1 is a Grief Dreams workshop by Dr. Joshua Black, which is designed to help you learn all about the topic. And number 2 is Crazy in Love, using romantic relationships as a vehicle for growth, which is designed to make you rethink modern intimate relationships. And that's by Dr. Joshua Black and Jade Carling Black. On the website, you can also book a one-on-one Grief Dreams consulting session with Dr. Black. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Clubhouse, @Grief Dreams. And we have 2 clubs on Clubhouse that you can follow, Grief Dreams and Grief Café. If you have Facebook, you can follow our Grief Dreams podcast page to be notified of when we release new episodes. You can also join the Grief Dreams Facebook group to share your dreams or hear more dreams of others. Once again, to help support the podcast, please subscribe and rate the podcast on the platform you listen to it on. This helps our show come up when people search for Grief Dreams podcast. Also, you can become a member of the podcast through Patreon. We have 3 membership levels, $1.50 a month, $7 a month, and $20 a month. And again, this money helps us run the podcast. You can find the Patreon link in the show notes. We would like to thank all those who continue to support us. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you can be comforted by your dreams tonight.